Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video on the Future Programmer YouTube channel. In this video of the Python Fundamental series, we will continue to look at the three data types of Chapter 4, which are lists, tuples, and dictionaries. Personally, I think some of the things that we will be looking at today are super cool and unique to the Python programming language, like list comprehension and dictionary comprehension. So without further ado, let's get started. For the last lesson of Chapter 4 of the Python Fundamental course, we're going to talk about advanced data structures, and it's really just exploring lists, tuples, and dictionaries in more depth. And this isn't going to be a beginner's tutorial, so if you want to learn about those three data types from scratch, check out the previous two videos in this series. With that said, the first thing we're going to talk about is multidimensional lists and tuples. We know that lists and tuples are used to hold data as a collection, and so far, those data that we've been putting into lists and tuples have been simple data types like strings, ints, floats, and booleans. But we can also store lists inside lists inside tuples, dictionaries inside lists, etc. You get the idea. And when we nest complex data types like lists inside another list or tuple, they're known as multidimensional lists or tuples. So here we have a matrix multidimensional list which holds three elements, the first of which is this list, the second of which is this list, and the third of which is this tuple. And if you look at this last tuple, it actually holds another dictionary inside it as the element at index 1. So if we print out the matrix, we'll see that it's just printed out normally. And accessing and modifying items inside a multidimensional list or tuple, it will seem somewhat intimidating at first, but it's just really like how we would do it with normal lists and tuples. So if we take a look at matrix, we'll see at index 0 is going to be this list. And so it's going to be 10, true, and 3.14. And at index 2 of this sublist, we would get 3.14 since that's just a normal list, and we find index 2 of it, which is going to be 3.14. And matrix at index 2 is going to be this tuple. Accessing index 1 of this tuple is going to give us this item, which is a dictionary. And if we try to get the value whose key is time, we would get 12, because the key of it is going to be time. So running this cell, we'll see everything printed out just as we expect them to be. And we can also assign items from a multidimensional list to variables just like normal. So matrix at index 1, 1 is going to be, let's first think about this entire list. What's at index 1 is going to be this list, and the index 1 of this smaller list is going to be true. So is Python good is going to be assigned to the value of true, so true would be printed out as the output. Modifying items is just as how we would modify normal lists. We first access the item and then use the equal sign, or in other words, the assignment operator, to assign a new value to it. In this case, we access the item at index 0 and then index 1, and we assign it to its opposite. So at first, index 0 and 1 is going to be, it's going to be index 0 and then index 1, which is going to be false. And if we assign it to its opposite, so this is now going to be true. So let's see if that is the case. So let me run this cell. We'll see the original value is going to be false, and after modifying it, it's going to be true. The second thing we're going to talk about today is the zip function. And it's not actually something you'll use all the time, but you will see it used in other programmers' work, as well as it's going to be used a lot when it comes to dictionary comprehension, which we'll talk about in just a moment. And what the zip function does is it merges multiple iterators, which you can think about as lists or tuples, together into one zip object, which for some reason can only be used once. And so let's take a look at this cell. We have 4 iterator objects, 2 of which are lists and 2 of which are tuples. If we call the zip function, where we pass in those 4 iterator objects, it's going to return a zipped a zip object called zipped. And so if I print this out, we'll see 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 3, 4, 5, 6 printed out. So let's talk about what happened behind the scenes. If we take a look at this entire list, it's going to appear as a multi-dimensional list with 3 tuples in it. So this is one tuple, this is another tuple, and this is another tuple. So we can think about it as this tuple being the first column right here, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then this is going to be this column right here, and this is going to be the last column right here. And the reason why those 6 numbers were entirely ignored in the zipping, or whatever you call using the zip function, is because there is no element in list 1 anymore to zip it with. So if I add 4 here, we'll see 4, 5, 6, 7 being added to the end of the list. But because it's not there, when we run this cell, we'll see only 3 tuples inside the list. Another way you can think about it is this 1 is going to be this 1, and this 2 is being this 2, and this 3 is going to be this 3, and this 2 is going to be the item right here, this 3 is right here, and this 4 is right here. You get the idea. So that is pretty much the zip function, which we'll use very soon when we talk about dictionary comprehension. And firstly, though, we're going to talk about list and tuples comprehension. If I were to ask you to create a list of even numbers between 10 and 21, most likely you will use a for loop approach. So you would first make an empty list and then iterate through a certain data, and then if the data in it fits a certain condition, you will use the .append method to append it to the end of the empty list. So printing that out, we'll see the correct output being outputted. That was 4 lines of code, and Python actually gives us the ability to do it in 1 line using list comprehension. Here's how. Instead of making an empty list, we make list of even numbers a list that actually has Python code in it. So we can see a starting square bracket and an ending square bracket. In here, we can rate it as num for num in range 10 and 21 if num divided by 2 has a remainder of 0. And printing this out, we'll see those numbers are printed out just like it was before. Now let's talk about what happened. So basically there is a for loop right here. For each num, inside what's returned from this range function, 10 and 21, if this number divided by 2 has a remainder of 0, we'll put num inside this list. If this condition is not satisfied, then just nothing will happen. And the syntax of list comprehension looks something like this. So there's going to be a list, which is whatever you want to name your list as, which is the variable name, or also known as the identifier. And then a starting bracket, expression, and this is going to be an expression. And this doesn't have to be just num. You can put num plus 1, num multiplied by 5. You can put whatever you want here. So expression for the element inside iterable, and element in the iterable. So it's going to be the element from the iterable, and the iterable is going to be the iterable data from which the new list is built, which is again just a list or a tuple. You can think of it like that. And if condition is equal to true, we would put expression into list. Here are a few more examples. Right now we have a people list, which is actually formatted somewhat weirdly. Let me just fix that in just a moment. And we can see, if I print this out, we would see this entire list printed out. And here we use list comprehension to filter out all these students. So we can see in this original list, we have teachers and we have students, right? So using this teachers array, we would iterate through people. So for each person in people, if the string teacher is in the lowercase person's name, then we would add p.upper inside teachers, and we'll see Bob the teacher, Lucas the teacher, and Colin the teacher added to the teachers array, and the students are just, not added to the teachers list. And here's another example. This is going to give us an equivalent of list range 10, but this is just a list comprehension. So for I in range 10, which is going to give us 0, 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 9. So we're going to add those numbers inside x, and y is going to be for each element in x, so 0 all the way up to 9, we're going to square them and put it in y. So let's take a look. 0 all the way up to 9 and 0 all the way up to 9 squared. And another useful place where you might see list comprehension used is actually when we want to give a list multiple values of the same value. So if we want to make a list of 10 truths, then, before we know list comprehension, we would have written true, true, true 10 times, and you would have to count how many times you have it written. But now that we know about list comprehension, we can use that to make a list. So for I in range 10, we would add true to the many truths list, which gives us the same result as writing a super long definition statement. And we can also use nested list comprehension, and this is actually this may appear complicated at first, but it's just the same as normal list comprehension. So for j in range 4, and j actually doesn't do anything here since it's just a looping variable. It doesn't actually appear in any of the other statements. So for j in range 4, we would add this to matrix. So what is this though? This is going to be for I in range 4, we would add I to this list. So basically matrix is going to be this whole thing 4 times. And this whole thing is going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, since that's the elements in range 4. So let me run this cell, and we'll see 0, 1, 2, 3, 0, 1, 2, 3, printed out 4 times in one entire matrix list. So this time j was 0, and this time j was 1, and this time j was 2, and this time j was 3. Something to keep in mind is that if you ever have to use tuple comprehension, then we need to use the tuple function to convert it. So here we have a list of numbers between 0 and 19, and if I get rid of those tuple function, then we would get an output of a generator object, and we'll talk about what those mean, what this memory address mean in a later chapter when we talk about objects. But for now though, just know that we have to add a tuple function, which we pass in the generator object inside the tuple function, and we will get the expected output. And now dictionary comprehension is going to be the last thing we talk about in this video, and the basic syntax will look something like this. So we're going to have a opening curly braces and a closing one. In here, we're going to have key value. But how does Python know what key to put though? So we're going to iterate through data, and for each element, it's going to be a key value pair. And since most of the data we're handling won't appear as key value pairs inside a list or a tuple, that's when we use the zip function that we just talked about before. So let's run this cell. And list 1 is going to be a list of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and tuple 2 is going to be the elements in list 1 multiplied by 10. And dictionary is going to be the element in list 1 as the key, and the elements in tuple 2 being the values. And how does Python find those values though? Is we use the zip function, which gives us a list of tuples. So in each tuple is going to be the key and then the value of the dictionary. And we'll see the list of the zip object printed out on the first line and the dictionary on the second line. Congratulations for completing Chapter 4 of the Python Fundamental course, which is actually a very important chapter because you learned about lists, tuples, and dictionaries. Those are going to be very powerful data types that you'll use all the time because it allows us to group data together as a collection and use them as one. And that's going to be very useful for you throughout your programming adventure. So to recap, today we talked about multidimensional lists and tuples. We talked about zip function, as well as comprehension, which is basically list comprehension, tuple comprehension, and dictionary comprehension.
And that's it for today's lesson. If you found this video helpful, make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe down below. In the next video of the Python Fundamentals series, we'll be making a fun project using what we have learned in these 3 videos. With that said, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you then.